No one taught you how to protect your mind. They taught you how to be efficient, how to stay busy, how to keep up, but never how to think clearly, never how to say no, never how to reclaim what's been slowly taken from you. So ask yourself, how much of your day is truly yours? How much of your attention is burned away by things you never chose, but somehow feel obligated to serve? The truth is hard. You're not unfocused because you're lazy. You're unfocused because you've been trained to betray yourself. One scroll, one meeting, one fake emergency at a time. You say yes to everything except what actually matters. You chase clarity but live in chaos. And then you wonder why you're exhausted, uninspired, and disconnected from who you were meant to become. Real focus isn't about getting more done. It's about remembering who you are. It's not a productivity trick. It's a rebellion, a revolt against the forces trying to fracture your attention and dull your edge. If you're ready to stop being shaped by the noise and start becoming the architect of your own mind, you're in the right place. And if that path calls to something deeper in you, consider subscribing for yourself, because each step toward clarity is a step back into your power. The greatest threat to your focus isn't what you don't know, it's what you tolerate. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, but in the quiet choices you make, the ones that seem harmless in the moment. You check a message, respond to a comment, open one more tab, and before you know it, your attention has been split 100 ways, not stolen, given. And what's worse is that you rarely notice the cost until the damage is already done. You tell yourself you're being productive because you're busy, but deep down you know that busy and focused are not the same thing. Busy is reactive, focus is intentional, and the longer you tolerate distraction disguised as importance, the more your mind becomes a place you no longer rule. Focus doesn't vanish all at once. It leaks. Slowly, it trickles out through every unguarded minute you surrender to things that don't matter. You think it's just 5 minutes, just one video, just one update, but those fragments accumulate. Over time, they form a pattern, a rhythm of self-abandonment, and that's what makes it so dangerous. It feels normal. It feels like this is just how life is now, but it's not. That scattered feeling you carry, that quiet frustration that you're capable of more but somehow always fall short, that's not laziness. That's not weakness. That's the result of 1,000 tiny distractions you allowed into your mind until you no longer knew where your focus ended and the world's noise began. It's easy to blame technology, other people, circumstances, but if you really look, the invasion didn't come through force. It came through invitation. You left the door open. Every time you said yes when you meant no, every time you told yourself it's fine to multitask, every time you gave away your energy to things that didn't deserve it. That's the truth most people don't want to face. You weren't defeated by a greater force. You were distracted by a lesser one, and slowly, over time, it chipped away at your edge. The mind doesn't grow sharper by accident. It grows sharper when you decide, finally, that your attention is sacred, that your time is not something to be casually donated to the nearest demand, that your peace isn't up for negotiation. Focus begins the moment you stop letting everything in. When you realize not all notifications deserve a reply, not all questions deserve an answer, not all access should be granted. You become powerful the day you decide to stop being available for everything, because availability in the wrong hands becomes a prison. You respond to everything and slowly stop responding to yourself. You start noticing it when you try to sit alone. The discomfort, the itch to check, the restless need for stimulation. That's not your personality. It's your nervous system, trained by constant interruption. And like any bad habit, it gets stronger the more you feed it. Focus isn't just about forcing your eyes on a task. It's about reclaiming your nervous system from a world addicted to urgency. You were not built to live in this constant state of alert. Your mind was not designed to jump from one thing to another without pause, and yet that's what most of us do every single day. Not because we're broken, but because we've been conditioned to think that stillness is laziness, that presence is unproductive, that silence is wasted time. But the truth is, silence is where your real thoughts live. Stillness is where your true direction begins to speak. Most people never hear that voice, not because it's silent, but because they're never quiet enough to listen. It's drowned out by updates, obligations, other people's agendas. And if you want to break that pattern, it starts with one hard decision. Stop tolerating what weakens you. That means closing the tabs, turning off the noise, saying no without apology, protecting your space like your future depends on it, because it does. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." That line isn't meant to guilt you. It's meant to wake you up, because you don't need more time. You need to stop letting the time you already have be pulled apart by things that don't matter. You need to stop believing that you can stay focused while living surrounded by chaos. No one thrives in a hurricane. You need to build shelter. You need structure. You need boundaries that protect the state of your mind, not just from other people, but from your own habits of avoidance. Focus is clarity, but clarity comes from confrontation. You have to look at what's eating your time. You have to name what you're tolerating. The habits, the people, the beliefs. You have to get honest about the moments where you abandon yourself for convenience. Because until you do that, no strategy will save you. No app, no routine, no tool. You can't organize chaos that you keep inviting. You have to cut it out at the root. That's the hard part. That's the work no one wants to do, but that's where the change happens. Your future is not built by the days you plan. It's built by the moments you protect. You don't need a perfect system. You need a line in the sand, a point where you say, "I don't do that anymore. I don't check my phone first thing. I don't respond to everything. I don't let distractions sit at the table of my attention." And every time you uphold that boundary, your focus strengthens. Your mind remembers what it feels like to belong to you again. And from that place, everything changes, not overnight, but steadily, relentlessly, like water shaping stone. There's a reason you feel fragmented. There's a reason you feel like your best ideas only come when you're away from the noise. It's not a coincidence, it's a signal. Your potential is not missing, it's buried. Buried under the weight of tolerating things you were never meant to carry. Every time you say, "I'm fine," to things that slowly corrode your energy, you lose a piece of yourself. Focus is not just a skill, it's an act of remembering who you were before the world pulled you in every direction. It's a process of returning to your inner center again and again until that place becomes your home, not just your escape. So the next time you wonder why you can't stay focused, don't look at your to-do list. Look at your boundaries. Don't ask what you need to add. Ask what you need to subtract. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every voice deserves your energy. Focus begins with the decision to stop giving your power away, especially to the things that look innocent, but steal the most from you. And once you make that decision, really make it, you'll realize the strength was never gone. It was just scattered. And now, finally, you're ready to gather it back. When life begins to feel chaotic, our first impulse is almost always to add. We pile on routines, buy new planners, download the next app that promises organization, and make lists so long they become a source of stress rather than clarity. We convince ourselves that the answer must be more structure, more systems, more control. But have you ever stopped to consider that maybe the answer isn't more? maybe the real breakthrough comes when you begin to remove. When you start looking at your life like a sculptor looks at stone, not trying to build something by stacking pieces on top, but by carving away what doesn't belong. We are told that growth is about accumulation, but that's a lie dressed as ambition. Real focus is not built on excess, it's revealed through reduction. You already have the capacity to be sharp, clear, and deeply present. What's in the way isn't a lack of tools. It's the clutter, the mental weight of every half-finished habit, every unnecessary task, every open-ended commitment you feel guilty about but haven't let go of. That guilt, those mental tabs running in the background, they drain more energy than any single task. It's like trying to sprint with a backpack full of rocks. You can build discipline, but if you never empty the load, you'll always be slower than you could be. Most people don't struggle because they lack drive. They struggle because they lack space. Their mind is a crowded room filled with noise, reminders, and pressure to do it all. So instead of moving forward with clarity, they freeze in place, overwhelmed by what they think they must carry. That's the hidden danger of modern life. We mistake movement for progress, busyness for productivity, and chaos for commitment. But real commitment is clean. It's simple, it's chosen. It doesn't require a dozen open projects to feel valid. In fact, the more serious you are about something, the less room you leave for anything else. We tend to collect goals like souvenirs, motivated in the moment, forgotten over time, and yet each one leaves a trace, a whisper in your mind that reminds you of what you said you'd do but haven't done yet. These silent burdens don't just take up time, they take up presence. They dilute your focus because your attention is split between what matters now and what's still unresolved. You're not scattered because your goals are bad. You're scattered because you're trying to carry too many of them at once. The irony is, we hold on to all of them hoping one will lead to a breakthrough, not realizing the real breakthrough happens the moment we let most of them go. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you seek tranquility, do less. Or more accurately, do what's essential." That's not advice from a man with too much free time. That's wisdom from someone who carried the weight of an empire and still understood that peace was found not in doing more, but in doing what truly mattered. The truth is, your energy was never meant to be divided endlessly. You were not designed to multitask your way to meaning. You were built for depth. And depth doesn't come from juggling, it comes from cutting, ruthlessly, courageously, and without apology. Subtraction is not just about removing noise, it's about creating focus through intentional absence. Think about that for a second. The silence you create by saying no is what allows your real priorities to echo. But that silence can be uncomfortable, especially at first, because when you stop filling every moment, you're forced to face what's left. And what's left is often the truth we've been avoiding, that we've been busy to escape clarity, that we've kept things complicated to avoid making the hard choice. It's easier to be buried under everything than to admit what no longer fits. But the more you subtract, the clearer the path becomes. You stop being pulled in 10 directions and start moving with precision. You stop negotiating with distractions and start protecting your attention like something sacred. And it is sacred. Your attention is the currency you pay for your future. Every time you spend it on the unnecessary, you underfund what truly matters. That's not a small loss. It's a life slipping away in pieces. So how do you begin this process? You don't need a dramatic reset. You start by asking one honest question. What can I remove right now that is not aligned with where I want to go? Not next week, not someday, right now. Maybe it's a goal you no longer believe in. Maybe it's a daily habit that drains you more than it helps. Maybe it's a conversation you keep having that leads nowhere. These may seem small, but they're not. These are the friction points that slowly wear down your will, the little distractions that compound into exhaustion, and the moment you let them go, even one, you feel something shift. Your mind gets quieter, your body breathes easier, and suddenly focus doesn't feel like a fight, it feels like returning home. This isn't about minimalism as a lifestyle trend, it's about clarity as a form of power. A mind that is uncluttered is a mind that moves with strength. And the irony is, once you start subtracting, you realize how little you actually need, not just to function, but to thrive. You realize that focus isn't something you chase, it's something you uncover. It's always been there, buried under the weight of what you thought was necessary. The most dangerous distractions are the ones that look like progress. The to-do lists that feel important but mean nothing. The goals you inherited but never chose. The tasks that win your energy but not your soul. These are the things you have to cut, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You care enough about your future to stop pretending every option is worth pursuing. You care enough about your mind to stop feeding it noise and call it purpose. When you begin to subtract, you create a new standard. You stop asking, "Can I do this?" and start asking, "Should I?" You stop measuring your day by how much you did and start measuring it by how aligned you were. That shift is where real growth begins. Because now your focus is no longer about managing life, it's about mastering it, one clean cut at a time. And maybe the most important thing to remember is this: subtraction is not loss, it's refinement. It's returning to the essence of what matters. And in that essence, you don't just find more focus, you find more peace, more power, and finally, more of yourself. There's a quiet moment that happens just before you say yes when you don't really want to. It's small, almost invisible. But if you catch it, you'll feel the tension, your body hesitating, your thoughts racing, a subtle pull in your chest. That moment is the crossroads between alignment and betrayal. Say yes, and you please the world while turning away from yourself. Say no, and you stand alone, but you stand in truth. And that's the real cost of saying yes too often. You trade clarity for approval, purpose for politeness, and focus for comfort. It feels easier in the moment, but it fragments your energy until your day belongs to everyone but you. Most people don't realize how many of their struggles come from this quiet refusal to honor their own limits. We imagine that strength is always about pushing through, doing more, being available, being helpful. But sometimes the greatest strength is restraint, the decision to protect your space, your time, your peace. Saying no is not an act of rejection, it's an act of self-loyalty. It's a declaration that your energy is finite and sacred, and not everything or everyone deserves access to it. Yet many of us say yes automatically out of habit, fear, guilt. We're afraid of seeming selfish, afraid of disappointing, afraid of losing connection. But what kind of connection is it if it only survives by you abandoning yourself? When you constantly say yes to things that don't align with who you are or where you're going, you begin to live a life that feels strangely disconnected. You're busy, yet unfulfilled, surrounded, yet unseen. You become everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. That's not generosity, that's erosion. You can't give what you don't have, and when your boundaries are soft, your focus gets blurred. Every yes to something misaligned is a no to the deeper work your life is asking you to do. And that's the trade most people don't see until it's too late. The Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that you cannot live in harmony with yourself while living in conflict with your values. To live with integrity means your choices must reflect your purpose, not someone else's opinion. It means your time must reflect your priorities, not someone else's urgency. And that's where real courage lives, not in being loud or aggressive, but in quietly refusing to betray your own direction, even when it's uncomfortable. Because saying no will make people uncomfortable. It will disappoint. It may confuse others. But you were not born to be understood by everyone. You were born to be deeply aligned with yourself. It's important to remember that saying no isn't about being closed off. It's not about being hard or distant. It's about being honest. It's about trusting that the right people in your life will respect your boundaries, and the wrong ones will reveal themselves the moment you start enforcing them. When you say no from a place of clarity, you're not rejecting others. You're accepting responsibility for your energy. You're choosing depth over distraction, presence over performance. And that's how real focus is built, not in isolation, but in self-trust. Every time you say no to something that isn't right, you strengthen your identity. You train your nervous system to stop defaulting to approval. You begin to reclaim your life in small, powerful ways. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you can't become who you truly are if you're constantly living someone else's script. No one will hand you the space to do that. You have to carve it out yourself, one no at a time. We often forget that every yes carries a cost. It's not free. It's a trade. And too often, we don't calculate what we're giving up in the process. You say yes to another meeting, and you say no to your creative time. You say yes to pleasing someone, and you say no to your peace. Over time, those trades shape your reality. You look up one day and wonder why you feel so off course, so tired, so disconnected from what used to matter. It didn't happen all at once. It happened one compromised decision at a time, one no you were too afraid to say. But it's never too late to shift, to pause before you commit, to ask yourself, does this align with who I want to be? Not who they expect me to be, not who I used to be, but who I'm becoming. If the answer is no, then let your response match. Not harshly, not with anger, but with firmness, with grace, with clarity. Because clarity doesn't always feel good, but it always leads somewhere meaningful. Start small. Say no to a call when you need silence. Say no to a plan that drains you. Say no to being the person who always says yes. You don't have to explain. You don't have to justify. No can be complete. It can be kind. It can be freeing. And the more you practice it, the stronger you become, not just in focus, but in identity. You begin to move through life with an energy that says, I know what I value, and I'm no longer willing to betray it for approval. That shift is quiet, but powerful, because once you've tasted the clarity that comes with saying no, you no longer crave the comfort of being liked. You crave the strength of being whole. That's what focus really is. Not a trick, not a tactic, but a pattern of self-loyalty repeated over time. A deep refusal to be pulled in every direction. A firm yes to what matters, and an unapologetic no to what doesn't. Every single time you choose that, you're not just protecting your attention, you're building a life that feels like yours again. The reason most people never find their edge isn't because they lack drive. It's because they try to master too many things at once. They wake up with a to-do list that reads like a declaration of war on every part of their life, and by the end of the day, they've attacked nothing with real force. They've touched everything but changed nothing. That's not strategy. It's exhaustion disguised as effort. True focus demands that you stop scattering your attention and start choosing your battlefield, not 1. Because clarity only arrives when you give your full energy to something that matters, without compromise, without backup plans, without keeping your options open just in case. Growth isn't born in the comfort of variety. It's forged in the fire of commitment. There's a kind of anxiety that follows those who live halfway in everything. It's subtle, but it lingers. They bounce between ideas, projects, people, always moving, never landing. And in that constant movement, they convince themselves they're progressing. But if you never stand still long enough to go deep, you never build anything solid. You skim the surface of your potential and wonder why you still feel empty. The uncomfortable truth is this: you cannot go deep when you're constantly looking sideways. You cannot conquer anything while you're flirting with everything. There is no greatness in divided attention. Aristotle said, "He who has never learned to obey cannot be a good commander." That obedience starts with your own decisions. You want command over your life? Learn to obey the mission you set. Not when it's easy, not when it's fun, but especially when it's dull, difficult, and invisible to everyone else. This is where discipline becomes something more than routine. It becomes devotion, not to outcomes or applause, but to the process itself. That's what separates the people who dabble from the ones who dominate. They obey the path they chose, and they walk it with full presence. Mastery doesn't arrive by accident. It requires full immersion. It asks that you plant both feet in one place and stay long enough for something real to grow. That could be your craft, your physical health, your inner discipline, your business, but it must be one. You can pivot later, but at the beginning, you must go narrow before you go wide. If you're trying to change everything at once, you'll dilute your energy and destroy your momentum. You can't build multiple empires with a single army. Choose one battlefield, and once you do, close the doors, burn the bridges, leave no exit. That might sound harsh, but it's liberating. Because the moment you choose one thing, all the noise dies. You no longer have to evaluate 100 options. You no longer have to chase every shiny opportunity. Your mind becomes quiet, focused, steady. You begin to move differently, not because you're working harder, but because you've finally stopped running from commitment. This is where power comes from, not from hustle, but from elimination. And when you truly commit, you stop asking if something will work and start asking how to make it work. That's the shift that changes everything. But commitment always feels like a risk, and that's why most people avoid it. They'd rather keep things open-ended. They want to test the waters without diving in. They want to try without giving it all. But nothing real is built on half-effort. That reluctance to go all in isn't caution. It's fear disguised as logic. And fear will always present the illusion of safety while quietly robbing you of transformation. You don't gain confidence by hedging your bets. You gain it by stepping fully into one thing and earning your growth through persistence, through resilience, through the kind of work most people abandon when discomfort begins. There's a strange peace that comes from total commitment, a sense of freedom in not having to decide every day where your energy goes, because you've already decided, and that one decision simplifies everything. You don't have to wonder what you should do today. You don't need new motivation. You just show up again and again and push your edge a little further. That's the rhythm of mastery. It's not loud, it's not glamorous, it's not filled with dopamine spikes, but it's solid, grounded, reliable, and over time it creates results that scattered effort never could. The moment you stop leaving yourself a way out, you unlock a deeper layer of focus. You stop negotiating with distractions. You stop entertaining alternatives. Your identity begins to shift. You're no longer someone who tries. You're someone who does. Not because it's easier, but because you've taken quitting off the table. That kind of mental framing is powerful. It creates tension, the good kind, the kind that pushes you forward because you've given yourself no choice but to succeed. That's what it means to go all in. Not recklessly, but deliberately. with eyes wide open and willfully engaged. The modern world offers endless options, and with that comes a hidden cost: paralysis. We've been told that keeping your options open is smart, but there's a point where it becomes a trap. A way to avoid deciding, a way to avoid failing, but without decisions you stay in limbo, and nothing of meaning is built in limbo. If you want to lead your life instead of reacting to it, you must commit, not just to action, but to direction. Otherwise you'll keep spinning in circles, calling it progress, while your potential rots from lack of use. When you treat your attention like an army and deploy it toward one mission, your results multiply. You begin to outpace people who are more talented, more resourced, more connected, because your energy is not fragmented. It's unified. There's a force behind someone who's fully locked in. It's hard to describe, but you feel it when you're around them. They move with certainty. They speak with clarity. They're not scattered. They're sovereign. And that kind of focus becomes magnetic, not just to others, but to opportunity itself. The world doesn't need more people doing more things. It needs more people doing one thing with all they've got. People who are willing to get bored and keep going. People who are willing to be misunderstood while they build. People who understand that chasing 10 paths leads nowhere fast, but devoting yourself to one can take you further than you ever imagined. This isn't about limitation, it's about leverage, and your life will change the day you stop asking how much you can do and start asking what's worth doing deeply. That answer is yours alone, but once you find it, defend it, anchor yourself in it, and don't look back. Because focus, at its highest level, is not about willpower, it's about identity. You choose who you are by the battlefield you commit to, and once you make that choice, you don't need motivation, you need presence, you need patience, you need repetition, and over time, that repetition turns effort into instinct, and instinct into power. That's when you know you've chosen the right battlefield, not when it feels good, but when it begins to shape you. When it calls something out of you that nothing else could, and in that transformation you discover what most people never will, that mastery isn't a gift you receive, it's a territory you earn, one quiet, focused day at a time. We're told that balance is the goal, that life should feel perfectly even, not too much work, not too much rest, not too fast, not too slow, everything in just the right amount. But the truth is, balance, at least the way most people chase it, isn't peace, it's paralysis. It becomes a way to stay safely in the middle, to avoid extremes, to avoid fully committing to anything that might actually demand more of you than you're ready to give. It's not really balance, it's indecision. It's hesitating at every turn because you're afraid that leaning too far in one direction might cost you comfort in another. And that fear, left unchecked, turns into a lifestyle. You start protecting your energy not because you're preserving it, but because you're afraid of exhausting it. You begin to chase routines that promise equilibrium, not excellence. You seek comfort, not growth. And the deeper problem is, this kind of balance seduces you with a false sense of maturity. It makes you feel responsible, measured, smart. But underneath it, there's no real direction, no conviction, no fire. Just a dull rhythm of doing enough to get by, but never enough to break through. The Stoics never worshipped balance the way we do. They aimed for harmony, but not the shallow kind that comes from doing a little of everything. Harmony, for them, came from alignment, living in accordance with your principles. And sometimes that meant choosing discomfort, sacrificing ease, giving more than seemed balanced to something that mattered. That's where the real difference lies. Modern balance is often about not tipping the scale. Stoic harmony is about making sure the scale is weighted toward meaning. You'll notice that most people who talk about balance are stuck. They're tired, but not from effort. They're drained from indecision, from trying to be everywhere at once, from saying yes to everything just a little and no to nothing completely. It's a slow erosion. You lose the edge of your ambition, the sharpness of your goals. Everything starts to feel foggy, like you're alive but not fully awake. And that's the danger, because once you normalize this state of lukewarm commitment, it becomes very hard to break. You lose the muscle of intensity. Intensity is not chaos. It's not recklessness. It's control applied with force. It's knowing what you want and channeling your entire being toward it. And that scares people, because it means letting go of balance. It means letting one thing matter more than others. It means missing out, saying no, disappointing people, risking failure. But if everything matters equally, nothing matters deeply. If you try to spread your focus like butter across toast, you won't have enough substance to change anything. Focus demands sacrifice, not forever, but for a season. A focused life is not a life without rest or joy. It's a life where rest and joy are earned, not used as escape, where they are part of the cycle, not the default. You work deeply, then you step away with intention. That's real balance. Not doing everything at once, but doing the right things in the right sequence. You give yourself fully to your craft, your project, your development, and then you recover fully. You don't water your time down by trying to hold everything at once. This version of balance, one based in control and clarity, requires courage. Because it's not neat, it's not symmetrical, it's not safe. It looks like obsession to people who don't understand it. But it's not obsession, it's commitment. And commitment in a distracted world always looks extreme, but only from the outside. On the inside, it feels like purpose. It feels like peace. Not the soft kind, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're here to do. Balance becomes a trap when it becomes a reason to avoid depth, a reason to never work late on something that excites you, a reason to never skip comfort for intensity, a reason to always pull back when you should push forward. The myth of balance convinces you that too much of anything will break you. But the truth is, too little of the right thing is what will make you feel lost. When you give just a small portion of yourself to what you care about, you rob yourself of the transformation that only full engagement can bring. You don't need to eliminate rest or joy to grow. You just need to stop using them as excuses to avoid the hard parts of commitment. Sometimes you need to let one part of your life go quiet, so another part can come alive. That's not imbalance. That's strategy. That's awareness. That's the kind of temporary sacrifice that leads to long-term alignment. And alignment is where focus becomes effortless, because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not negotiating between distraction and desire. You're walking in one direction with your whole self behind it. It's easy to talk about priorities, harder to live by them, because priorities mean saying no to things that others think are important. They mean appearing unbalanced in a world that's obsessed with keeping up. But you weren't built to live someone else's timeline. You weren't built to juggle endlessly. You were built to choose. And your life doesn't get sharper until you do. There's power in doing less, but doing it with intensity. There's clarity in letting go of what's good, so you can give your full strength to what's essential. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Not what you want to do, not what you feel like doing, but what must be done." That's not balance, that's conviction. And conviction will always be more powerful than trying to keep everything even, because real transformation is never balanced. It's tilted, it leans in, it demands more of you in one area so that your entire life can rise with it. And when you understand that, balance stops being the goal. It becomes the byproduct of living with focus. Let the world chase evenness. You chase excellence. Let them dabble. You go deep. Let them fear going too far. You fear never going far enough. And when they ask how you stay so focused, so grounded, so clear, you'll know it wasn't from trying to balance everything. It was from choosing what mattered most and pouring yourself into it without apology. That's not imbalance. That's power. And it's the only kind of focus worth building. Focus isn't how long you stare at a screen. It's not how many hours you sit at a desk or how tightly you structure your day. That's where most people go wrong. They treat focus like a time investment, something that builds value simply by volume. But focus doesn't reward time. It rewards depth. You can spend 10 hours half present and achieve less than someone who locked in for one. Because attention that is spread thin, even over long stretches, never sinks deep enough to create real momentum. What matters isn't how long you work. It's how deeply you engage, how fully you cut through the noise and disappear into the task at hand, leaving behind the mental clutter and the urge to multitask. The world trains us to admire busyness, to equate packed calendars with productivity. But true productivity isn't frantic, it's focused. It's a quiet, sharp state of mind where your thoughts stop bouncing and begin drilling into something real. The modern brain is overstimulated and undertrained. Constant pings, endless scrolling, fragmented attention. We're taught to move fast, but not to think deeply. And that shallow state of engagement becomes our default. Jumping between tabs, starting without finishing, working without ever arriving fully. The tragedy is that we've confused being active with being effective. Imagine a river flowing wide and shallow. It looks powerful, but it moves slowly. Now imagine that same river forced into a narrow canyon. The same water now cuts through stone. That's the difference between scattered effort and concentrated intensity. One drifts, the other carves. Your mind is the same. When you focus without distractions, without looking over your shoulder every few minutes, you develop the power to break through barriers that once seemed impossible. You don't need more hours. You need more intensity within the hours you already have. But intensity doesn't happen by accident. It's built like a muscle. It takes training to get your brain to go deep. Most people can't focus for more than a few minutes without reaching for their phone, switching windows, or checking something irrelevant. Not because they're lazy, but because they've never practiced intensity. Depth feels foreign to them. It feels unnatural to do one thing, and only one thing, with complete presence. But the more you practice it, the more it becomes your edge. You don't need a perfect environment or a 4-hour block of free time. What you need is the discipline to show up fully, even if it's just for 1 hour. 1 hour of undiluted work can often do what 5 hours of scattered effort cannot. Because when your mind is fully engaged, it sees what it normally misses. It solves problems faster. It creates more original ideas. It connects dots that others overlook. This is the kind of work that feels effortless on the outside, but inside, it's like your whole being is tuned to one frequency. That's what intensity feels like. Not forceful, but precise. The problem is, most people want intensity without discomfort. But the truth is, you have to pass through discomfort to access real depth. The first 20 minutes of focused work often feel heavy, slow, even boring. That's your mind resisting the shift from shallow to deep. It's detoxing from dopamine. It's adjusting from reacting to creating. But if you can sit through that, if you can hold your attention steady instead of seeking escape, you'll feel something click. Your thoughts start to settle. Your distractions quiet down. You enter a rhythm that can't be reached by staying on the surface. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. in all disorder, a secret order. That's the gift of intensity. It reveals the hidden structure beneath the noise. It shows you what your scattered mind could never notice. That's why focused people seem wise beyond their years. Not because they know more, but because they see more. They have clarity not from consuming more information, but from removing everything that isn't relevant in the moment. They think deeper because they slow down long enough to hear the quiet truths the rest of the world drowns out. The illusion of time keeps people trapped. They believe that if they just had a longer day, a better schedule, more room to breathe, they'd finally focus. But the truth is, they don't need more time. They need better use of the time they already waste. Waiting for the perfect moment to concentrate is like waiting for silence in a city. It rarely comes. You don't focus because it's convenient. You focus because you've decided that presence matters more than comfort. That intention matters more than routine. And that depth, real depth, is worth the initial resistance. You train intensity by giving your full attention to small windows of time, 30 minutes, 1 hour. But within that time, you remove all escape routes, no checking messages, no background noise, no mental tabs left open, just full immersion. And in that immersion, you'll feel the difference. You'll feel what most people never experience. Your mind sharpening, your thoughts aligning, your ideas building on each other instead of scattering. That's how breakthroughs happen, not by brute force, but by sustained depth. The reason this matters so much is because your most important work, the kind that moves your life forward, cannot be done from the surface. It cannot be built from distraction. Whether it's writing, building, learning, or creating, none of it can grow in shallow soil. You need to go beneath the surface, and that requires focus that cuts, not just focus that lingers. When you live in a distracted state, everything feels difficult and progress feels random. But when you live with intention, your path begins to form under your feet. Not all at once, but one deep session at a time. Intensity is a decision. It's choosing to be here, fully, unapologetically, when your mind wants to run. It's choosing to engage instead of skim, to build instead of bounce. That decision, repeated daily, will do more for your life than any time management system ever could, because you'll stop measuring your days by hours and start measuring them by impact. You'll stop counting how long you worked and start noticing how much you changed, how much progress you actually made when you finally stopped being half present in everything. So don't aim for longer days. Aim for deeper ones. Don't try to squeeze more into your time. Try to show up more fully to the time you already have. Even 1 hour of real intensity can reshape your direction. Even one focused moment can shift the entire tone of your day. You don't need more time to become who you're meant to be. You just need to start using the time you've already been given, with depth, with clarity, with presence. That's focus, and that's how transformation begins. Focus isn't something you stumble into. It's not a mood or a tool you can pick up when it's convenient. It's something you train, not just through repetition, but through awareness. And the first step to awareness is observation, without judgment, without flinching. Most people lose focus and never ask why. They just blame the task, the timing, the environment, or even themselves, and move on. But the Stoics lived by a different rhythm. They turned inward. They examined everything, not to indulge overthinking, but to gain clarity. They understood that clarity is power, and that power starts with learning to watch yourself the way a strategist studies the battlefield. When your mind starts to drift, there's always a reason. It's not random. It follows patterns. Some of those patterns are subtle, like fatigue or boredom. Others are emotional, self-doubt, fear of failure, the urge to avoid discomfort. But unless you take the time to slow down and observe, you'll never see them. You'll keep reacting instead of responding. You'll keep reaching for focus like it's a switch, instead of realizing it's a relationship with your own attention, your own triggers, your own thoughts. And like any relationship, it needs to be understood before it can be improved. Every time you sit down to work and your attention slips, that's not a failure. It's feedback. It's your mind telling you something. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe you're unclear about what really matters. Maybe you're chasing too many things at once. But if you never ask, if you never pause long enough to really notice, then you never learn. And if you don't learn, you repeat, over and over again. That's how people stay stuck in shallow work for years, busy but not progressing, active but not aware. When you train the eye to see clearly, you begin to understand your internal landscape. You notice what drains you and what strengthens you. You become aware of the small decisions that pull you off track. That moment when you glance at your phone, that moment when your thoughts drift to something unrelated, that moment when you postpone the hard part of the task and justify it with "just for now." These are the moments that shape your focus more than any routine or planner ever could. Because this is where power is lost or preserved, not in the big decisions, but in the tiny ones you make when no one's watching. Training the mind begins with noticing the nature of your distractions. Are they physical, emotional? Are they rooted in fear or in habit? Do they show up when you're uncertain or when you're about to do something meaningful? The answers are different for everyone, but the discipline is the same. You must become a student of your own attention, not just forcing it into place, but understanding why it slips. Because the more you understand that, the more you can stop treating focus like a task and start treating it like a skill. Skills require feedback. Athletes watch tape. Musicians listen to recordings, and those who seek focus must study themselves with the same level of intention. You don't grow by pushing harder, you grow by becoming more precise. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is just as true for focus. If you don't know why your mind drifts, you'll start to believe that you're just not the focused type. But that's not true. You're just untrained, unaware. And once you bring awareness to it, everything starts to change. The act of watching yourself isn't glamorous. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's subtle. It happens in moments of silence when you ask yourself, why did I just check my phone? What emotion triggered that distraction? Was I avoiding something difficult? Or was I just tired? These are small questions, but they reveal large truths. Because every distraction you fall into is connected to something deeper. And the more you understand that connection, the more power you have to interrupt it, not with willpower, but with wisdom. Wisdom builds with repetition. The more you observe your patterns, the more clearly you begin to see the traps before they pull you in. You notice the time of day when your energy dips. You recognize the thoughts that trigger avoidance. You catch the small lies you tell yourself when you don't want to face discomfort. And slowly, your mind becomes a place you can navigate, rather than a place that runs you in circles. That's what training really means, not perfection, but progress. Not total control, but increasing clarity. Most people never get there because they skip this step. They want discipline without awareness. They want focus without introspection. But discipline without self-understanding turns into rigidity. You can force yourself into focus for a while. You can use pressure, guilt, shame, but it won't last. Because deep focus doesn't come from pressure, it comes from presence, from knowing yourself so well that you can guide your attention like a tool, from trusting that when your focus slips, you'll know how to bring it back, because you understand why it left. This kind of awareness creates a foundation that can't be shaken by circumstance. You no longer need perfect conditions to focus. You don't need silence or motivation. You just need to see clearly. Because once you understand your mind, you can work with it, not against it. You can stop the spiral before it begins. You can make adjustments instead of judgments. And in that space, real focus becomes natural. Not because life got easier, but because you became more aware. This is not a one-time lesson. It's a way of living. The Stoics practiced it daily. They believed that a life unexamined was a life wasted, that your ability to see yourself clearly was more valuable than any external success. Because clarity isn't just about productivity, it's about peace. It's about walking through your day without being pulled in 100 directions. It's about knowing, with confidence, where your energy is going and why. And that kind of knowing only comes from watching, not once, but often, quietly, with patience. Train the eye, train the mind. Watch your patterns not to shame them, but to understand them. Not to fix everything in a day, but to stop walking blindly through habits that keep you small, because once you see clearly, you can move deliberately. You can reclaim the moments where you used to check out. You can rebuild trust with your own attention. And when you do that, when you stop giving away your power unconsciously, you don't just become more focused, you become more free. There's a reason silence feels uncomfortable in today's world. We've been conditioned to fill every moment with noise. If we're not talking, we're texting. If we're not scrolling, we're listening to something. The background hum never stops. It follows us from morning to night. Notifications, group chats, calls, headlines, opinions. It's a constant flood of attention demands. And over time, that flood erodes the very thing we need most: stillness. Because in silence, something rare happens. Your thoughts start to surface. Your emotions become clearer. You hear yourself again. But the modern world doesn't want that. It wants you distracted, reacting, endlessly plugged in. And without even realizing it, most people comply. We think being available is a strength, that replying fast makes us dependable, that being reachable means we're responsible. But what it really means is that your boundaries are paper thin, that anyone can access your attention at any time. And once your attention is always up for grabs, your mind never rests. It never fully anchors to the work in front of you, the moment you're in, or the thoughts trying to form beneath the surface. Focus doesn't die all at once. It fades each time you allow yourself to be pulled into someone else's urgency. Each time you trade solitude for stimulation and depth for noise. The truth is, silence is not a luxury. It's a weapon. It's what keeps your mind sharp in a world that constantly tries to dull it. It's what allows your thoughts to crystallize instead of getting lost in the current of constant communication. But silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of space. Space to think, to process, to reflect. Space to understand what actually matters and what's just loud. The more noise you allow in, the harder it becomes to tell the difference. You become reactive instead of intentional, distracted instead of grounded. And it's not just about the noise around you, it's also the noise within you, the mental clutter that grows when you never take the time to be alone with your own mind. Silence is uncomfortable at first because it confronts you. It holds up a mirror. And sometimes what you see isn't polished or easy, but that's the point. Silence gives you truth without decoration. It shows you the thoughts you've been running from, the decisions you've avoided, the emotions you've muted. And when you face those things, you start to rebuild clarity from the inside out. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The more we value things outside our control, the less control we have." And what's more outside of your control than the constant demands of others? Their texts, their opinions, their expectations. The moment you allow every voice to enter, you lose the strength to listen to your own. Protecting your silence isn't selfish, it's strategic. When people can't always reach you, they start to respect the times when they can. When you step back from the noise, your presence gains weight. You stop blending into the background of distraction. You become intentional, deliberate, focused. And yet, most people fear silence, not because it's boring, but because it's unfamiliar. We've trained ourselves to seek stimulation at every turn. A few seconds of waiting becomes a reason to grab the phone. A quiet evening feels like a void to be filled. But in truth, those quiet moments are the foundation of focus. They're where ideas are born, where your mind reorders itself, where you connect dots that would never appear in the middle of chaos. Silence is where you notice what's been out of alignment. It's where you feel your instincts more clearly. That instinct to slow down, to pivot, to recommit. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And if you're too loud, you'll miss it. The most focused people aren't those who do the most. They're the ones who guard their time, their energy, their peace. They're not in every group chat. They don't comment on every post. They're not always reachable. And yet when they speak, people listen. When they act, people notice. Because their presence hasn't been diluted, their words haven't been wasted, and their silence has made their focus stronger. That kind of strength doesn't come from discipline alone. It comes from space, from knowing that not everything deserves a response. Not every sound deserves your attention. You don't have to disappear completely, but you do need moments where you step away from the current. Even 30 minutes of silence a day can sharpen your focus more than hours of noisy work. A walk without headphones, a morning without notifications, an evening with no replies. These small rituals are where your mind resets, where you remember that not all urgency is real and not all noise is meaningful. The world will always try to pull you back in, but every time you say no to the noise, you say yes to your clarity. You say yes to your direction. Silence also builds strength in conversation. When you're not always speaking, you learn to observe. You notice what others miss. You hear what's not being said. You listen not to reply, but to understand. That kind of listening is rare and powerful. It changes the way you show up in relationships, in work, in life. Because now, you're not reacting to the noise. You're responding from a place of grounded awareness. That's what focus really is. Not just locking in on a task, but moving through the world with intention, unbothered by things that don't matter. You don't have to explain your silence. You don't have to justify your boundaries. The people who respect you will understand. The ones who don't were never really listening anyway. What matters is that you start treating silence not as a gap, but as a strength. Not as an absence, but as a foundation. A mind trained in silence becomes unshakable, because it no longer depends on the world for direction. It listens inward. It moves with clarity. And that kind of mind doesn't chase focus. It becomes focus. Focus is not a mood that appears when the timing is perfect. It's not a feeling you wait for. It's not something that visits you randomly and then disappears without warning. Focus is summoned. It's built, cultivated, sharpened. And just like any warrior preparing for battle, you must approach it with intention. You don't stumble into deep work by accident. You arrive there by design, by creating rituals that tell your mind, your body, and your environment. Now, we begin. There's something ancient about this. Throughout history, warriors and artists alike have understood the power of ritual, not because rituals are magical, but because they're psychological. They mark the shift from ordinary to extraordinary, from the casual to the committed. A ritual doesn't need to be complicated, it just needs to be consistent. Maybe it's as simple as opening a specific notebook, sitting in one chair, brewing tea in silence, playing one specific soundtrack that signals your transition from the outside world to your inner command center. These rituals aren't habits, they're triggers. They don't just organize your time, they prime your state. They give structure to your intention and stability to your mind. Most people try to focus in a state of mental chaos. They go from a flurry of messages and notifications into tasks that demand depth. No buffer, no transition, just immediate expectation. And then they wonder why they can't stay engaged, why they feel restless, why the work feels harder than it should. It's because the mind doesn't switch gears instantly. The nervous system doesn't obey the clock. It obeys patterns, and rituals are those patterns. They train your brain to associate specific actions with specific outcomes. Over time, the ritual becomes the door, and your mind learns to walk through it. There's something powerful that happens when your brain knows what's coming. When it senses the pattern, the cues, the rhythm, it stops fighting. It stops scanning for distractions. It locks in, not because you forced it, but because you prepared it. You created the conditions for it to work with you, not against you. That's the difference between chasing focus and creating it. One is reactive, the other is deliberate. But the deeper benefit of ritual is what it protects you from. It protects you from indecision, from hesitation, from the friction that builds when you have to convince yourself to start. With a ritual in place, you don't negotiate with your impulses every morning. You don't wonder if now is the time. You already know. The ritual removes the question. It removes the noise. And in doing so, it preserves your willpower for what matters most. Execution. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And in the silence of ritual, you turn intention into identity. You stop being someone who talks about goals, and you become someone who shows up every day. Not because it's easy, but because it's what you do. And slowly, your ritual becomes more than a routine. It becomes a reflection of your values. A quiet reminder that your time matters, that your attention is sacred, that your work is worthy of reverence. The ritual also acts as a boundary. It separates you from the world's demands. When you light that candle, or put on that track, or close the door behind you, you're sending a message. To others, yes, but more importantly, to yourself. You're saying, "This is my space. This is my focus. This is my mission." And that message, repeated often enough, becomes a source of strength. Because in a world that constantly pulls your attention outward, your ritual pulls it back in. And here's where the power compounds. The more often you repeat your ritual, the less energy it takes to focus. The resistance fades, the noise quiets, the chaos outside begins to feel irrelevant. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You trained yourself to create space, to honor it, to protect it. And within that space, you begin to build something most people never experience: flow. Flow isn't luck. It's not a mystical force. It's the natural result of consistent cues, repeated focus, and a mind that knows when to switch on. And rituals are the switch. They turn your ordinary environment into a sacred one. They turn the everyday into something sharpened, elevated, precise. That's why rituals matter. They don't just help you start, they help you transform. But don't confuse ritual with rigidity. This isn't about making your day robotic. It's about making your focus reliable. You can adapt, you can evolve. What matters is not what the ritual looks like, it's what it represents. It represents discipline, commitment, respect for your time. Even if it's 5 minutes of silence before the work begins. Even if it's closing all your tabs except one. Even if it's placing your phone in another room. These small acts are not small. They're declarations. They are you saying, I'm not here to be scattered. I'm here to build something real. And that kind of presence is rare. Most people are constantly shifting, physically in one place, mentally in 10. But with ritual, you anchor yourself. You come back to one place, one task, one moment, and you stay there. Not forever, just long enough for something meaningful to happen, long enough for the noise to fall away, long enough for your best ideas to rise. There's no shortcut to deep work, no hack for long-term mastery, but there is a rhythm, a pattern, a way to step into your best self again and again without needing to be in the perfect mood. Ritual gives you that rhythm. It becomes the steady beat beneath your progress. And when everything else feels uncertain, when motivation fades, when clarity blurs, when life gets messy, your ritual stays, waiting for you, ready to bring you back. So build it, shape it, refine it, and then protect it with everything you have. Because once you have a ritual that summons focus, you no longer fear distraction. You no longer hope for inspiration. You show up and you go to war, calmly, quietly, powerfully, one focused session at a time. The mind is not naturally built for stillness or structure. Left on its own, it leans toward comfort, toward routine, toward whatever feels easiest in the moment. It avoids friction, it looks for shortcuts, and in that ease, we lose our edge. Not because we're incapable, but because we've never trained ourselves to thrive under pressure. We mistake calm for growth and confuse convenience with mastery. But comfort is deceptive. It flatters the ego while starving the will. It whispers that you're doing enough, even as your deeper potential sits untouched, waiting to be tested by something more demanding. This is why most people stay the same, not because they lack ambition, but because they protect themselves from the very conditions that would force them to rise. Pressure feels uncomfortable, and so we label it as bad. But in truth, pressure is where focus is born. It's the spark that wakes the dormant parts of us, the mental tension that pushes clarity into the foreground. You don't become sharp by doing what's easy. You become sharp by doing what's necessary, even when it stretches you, even when it forces you to move faster, think clearer, and show up with more presence than you thought you had. There's a difference between fake pressure and chosen pressure. Fake pressure is the endless noise we absorb from the outside world. Other people's expectations, comparisons, imagined judgments. That kind of pressure drains you because it's reactive. But chosen pressure is different. It's when you raise the stakes on purpose, when you make a commitment that scares you just enough to take it seriously, when you give yourself something to lose, something that forces you to focus. And that's the kind of pressure that sharpens, that strengthens, that reveals the version of you who no longer has time to doubt. Set a deadline that's too tight. Say it out loud. Put your name behind it. Let other people know what you're aiming for, not because their validation matters, but because now your reputation's on the line, and your brain knows it. Suddenly, you stop browsing. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions. You act. You adapt. You make decisions faster because indecision is no longer an option. That's the beauty of pressure. It forces you to stop perfecting and start progressing. It removes the cushion and replaces it with urgency. When you have nothing to prove, you can afford to delay. But when there's a target in sight, when there's a cost to missing it, your energy reorganizes. You stop giving attention to things that don't matter. You become more deliberate, more economical with your time. That's when your mind starts working with precision, not because you suddenly became smarter, but because pressure gave your thoughts a single direction. That's how you collapse time, not by working longer, but by working harder in less time because you have no choice. Seneca said, "It is difficulties that show what men are." And difficulty is exactly what most people avoid. They seek balance, not challenge. They seek control, not confrontation. But pressure is a kind of confrontation, with yourself, with your excuses, with your comfort zone. It's not there to break you. It's there to show you what you've been hiding from. The moment you choose to step into pressure instead of running from it, you become someone else, someone more capable, more focused, more alive. But pressure alone isn't enough. It must be connected to something meaningful, not just arbitrary deadlines, but commitments that align with your deeper mission. Otherwise, it becomes stress without purpose. The goal isn't to live in a constant state of tension. The goal is to use pressure as a lever, to move what you've been too afraid to lift, to get you to act on what you already know matters but haven't made real. This isn't about burnout. It's about controlled fire. You don't let it consume you, you channel it. And when you do, something changes. You begin to crave that edge. Not the chaos, but the clarity that pressure brings. You learn that you're not fragile. You learn that you can take a hit and keep moving, that you can feel the fear and still choose action. And the more you do it, the more you trust yourself under tension. That trust is what most people never build, because they never put themselves in situations that demand it. They live in soft conditions and wonder why their confidence is brittle. You grow confidence the same way you grow muscle, by putting resistance on it. You build belief by surviving situations you once thought would break you. And pressure is how you create those situations on purpose. You don't wait for life to test you. You test yourself. You raise your own standard. You create challenges before the world creates them for you. That's where focus multiplies, when it's not a nice idea, but a necessary response to the standards you've chosen. Pressure also does something subtle but important. It reveals what doesn't matter. When you're under pressure, you have less time for fluff. You don't indulge in overthinking. You don't drift into meaningless conversations. You focus on results. And in that moment, your priorities reorganize themselves. The non-essential falls away. What you're left with is a mind sharpened by urgency and refined by constraint. You stop being someone who hopes to stay focused, and you become someone who has no option but to be. You don't need to live in constant pressure. That's not the point. But you do need moments where the stakes are high enough to cut through the fog, where your focus isn't something you have to fight for. It's something that arrives, fully formed, because you've committed yourself so deeply that nothing else fits. That's when work becomes purpose. That's when motion becomes momentum. That's when you stop avoiding growth and start accelerating into it. Pressure is not the enemy. It's the forge. It's what reveals the parts of you that are still untested, the strength you haven't accessed yet, the discipline you haven't had to rely on until now. And once you see what you're capable of under pressure, you stop fearing it. You start using it, not as a burden, but as fuel. Because the difference between a distracted life and a focused one isn't always intelligence or planning. Sometimes it's simply this: one person chose comfort, the other chose pressure. And from that choice came a different level of clarity, a different kind of focus, one forged, not found. People are surrounded by noise but rarely touched by truth. Every day the volume rises: notifications, messages, small talk, opinions, updates. It's constant. And somewhere in that endless stream of sound, the most important voice gets drowned out: your own. We don't lose clarity because we're broken. We lose it because we've given too much of our attention to everything except ourselves. Solitude in a world addicted to distraction isn't just rare, it's radical. It's where your real voice, the one buried beneath expectations and noise, finally starts to rise. But most people fear solitude, not because they're too busy, but because they're afraid of what will surface when the distractions disappear. When there's no one to impress, nothing left to chase, and nowhere to run mentally, what's left is you. And if that version of you has been neglected, ignored, or misunderstood, then sitting alone feels unbearable. So we run. We keep scrolling, keep talking, keep reacting, anything to avoid being still enough to actually hear what's inside. But the paradox is this: the very thing we avoid is the very thing we need. Solitude doesn't isolate you. It reunites you with the part of yourself that's been calling out all along. Clarity doesn't come from the outside world. It comes from space. Space to think, to feel, to examine. Without space, everything blends together. Your goals, your fears, your habits, your values. You start mistaking motion for meaning, noise for purpose. But when you create room, when you step back, when you sit with silence, you begin to notice what's real. You start to hear that faint inner signal that says, "This isn't you," or "You've been drifting." That's the signal you've been waiting for, and it only emerges when the volume around you goes down. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And that awakening isn't always poetic. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. You realize how much time you've spent chasing the wrong things. You realize how often you've betrayed your own instincts for approval. You see clearly the distance between who you are and who you could be. But in that discomfort is power. That voice, once it's no longer buried under 1,000 influences, begins to guide you. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force. It simply reminds you of what's essential. And when that voice grows stronger, distractions start to look different. They lose their appeal. Because now you've reconnected with something deeper, your direction. Solitude isn't the absence of connection. It's the foundation of all meaningful connection. When you know yourself, you no longer chase relationships out of emptiness. You no longer shapeshift to fit in. You engage with the world from a place of clarity. You say yes with intention and no without guilt. You don't just move, you move with direction. And that kind of focus can't be faked. It can't be taught in a course or hacked with an app. It comes from knowing who you are beneath the noise, and you can only find that version of you when you're finally alone. There's a kind of peace that emerges when you sit in silence long enough to stop resisting it. Your thoughts slow down. The endless internal commentary fades, and what's left is not some grand revelation, but a quiet presence, a groundedness, a realization that you don't need to constantly chase something to feel valuable, that who you are when the world is quiet is already enough. From that place, focus becomes natural. It stops being a technique and becomes a state, a default. Because your attention is no longer being stolen, it's being guarded, protected by the clarity that only solitude can give. Some of the most powerful people in history built their lives around solitude, not to isolate themselves from the world, but to sharpen their mind before returning to it. They understood that silence isn't a weakness, it's a weapon. It strips away illusion. It forces you to confront what's real. And in that confrontation, you stop reacting to life and start designing it. You stop being pulled in 1,000 directions and start walking one path deliberately. That's what solitude gives you. Not just space, but strength. The problem is, we wait for solitude to find us. We think it will happen naturally when things slow down, when the to-do list is shorter, when life is less chaotic. But that moment rarely comes. So instead, we have to create it. We have to carve out time, not just to recharge, but to reflect. We have to protect it like we protect our schedule, our routines, our goals. Because without solitude, every goal becomes someone else's goal. Every decision becomes reactive. Every day becomes noise. Start small. 10 minutes in the morning, no phone, no music, just stillness. Let your mind speak without interruption. Let the silence teach you what you've been missing. And over time, something shifts. Your thoughts stop racing. Your priorities become clearer. You don't panic when the world is loud because you've trained yourself to return to silence. You don't feel lost in uncertainty because you've already faced yourself in the quiet. That's where your focus is built, not in the storm, but in the stillness before it. This is what most people never understand. They think more input equals more clarity, but real clarity comes from subtraction, from stepping away, from letting your own voice rise above the noise. Because once you hear that voice, truly hear it, you realize it's been speaking all along. It was just waiting for you to listen. And once you do, your life starts to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, consistently, with direction. You say no to things that used to pull you in. You stop apologizing for needing space. You move slower, but with more force. Because now, every step is backed by something real. Not just reaction, but intention. Not just noise, but depth. And that's how you build a life that's not just focused, but aligned. Solitude is not a retreat from life. It's a return to yourself, a way to wake up, not just from distraction, but from disconnection. And when you wake up, truly, you don't just live differently. You lead yourself differently. You create from a place of inner strength. You respond with purpose. And you become the kind of person whose focus is no longer fragile, but forged, in silence, in stillness, in truth. Most of the battles we fight aren't visible. They're quiet. They happen in the spaces no one else can see, in the decisions you delay, in the doubts you entertain, in the small daily negotiations with your lesser self. It's easy to look outside and blame the chaos of the world for your lack of focus. The notifications, the news, the responsibilities. But what if the real enemy doesn't knock on your door? It lives inside your mind. It whispers when you hesitate. It nods when you choose comfort over effort. And it celebrates every time you postpone your potential. The Stoics understood this clearly. They weren't fixated on controlling the external world because they knew that the true war was internal. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And he was right. We imagine rejection before we try. We picture failure before we act. We replay past wounds as if reliving them gives us power. But in reality, all it does is drain our strength. That's the trick your inner enemy plays. It disguises passivity as safety, and you don't even realize you're losing ground until the cost shows up in your results, in your confidence, in your quiet regret. Focus isn't just about avoiding distractions. It's about defending your inner space. Because what you think, you begin to feel. And what you feel, you start to act on. Every time you let doubt lead, even just a little, it takes up more room. It becomes familiar. It starts to feel like truth. But doubt isn't truth. It's a shadow cast by a moment of fear. And like any shadow, it disappears the second you bring it into the light. That's why awareness matters more than willpower. You don't defeat the inner enemy by force. You disarm it by noticing it, by calling it out, by refusing to let it speak without being questioned. The truth is, everyone has that voice. The one that tells you you're not ready, that people will judge you, that you're too late or not good enough. But the difference between those who move forward and those who stay stuck isn't that one group has silence inside. It's that one group stopped believing the voice was theirs. They learned to separate their deeper self from the noise, to hear that fear rise and still choose to act. Not recklessly, not carelessly, but intentionally, with discipline. And discipline isn't just about structure or control. It's not only about waking up early or checking boxes. True discipline is about devotion to your higher self. It's about staying loyal to the version of you that wants to grow, even when your habits, your emotions, and your impulses pull in the opposite direction. It's about protecting the flame, not just against storms from the outside, but against the wind you create inside your own mind. Every day you're either feeding the voice that lifts you or the one that keeps you small. There is no neutral ground. Every choice is a vote. Every delay is a quiet agreement with fear. Every excuse is a subtle nod to your limitations, and these accumulate, not dramatically, but gradually, until one day the gap between who you are and who you could have been feels too wide to cross. That's why you have to catch it early. Catch the thought before it becomes a belief. Catch the hesitation before it becomes a pattern. Catch the envy before it poisons your self-worth. And it's not about being perfect. It's about being present enough to notice what's happening inside. Most people live on autopilot. Their thoughts direct them, their feelings control them, and they wonder why they can't focus, why they can't commit, why their lives feel like static. But the truth is, they've never taken the time to question who's behind the wheel. They've never trained themselves to lead from within, and if you don't lead yourself, your inner enemies will. That's where real focus begins, not with a clean desk, but with a clear conscience, not with a new productivity app, but with the courage to face yourself. Because until you deal with the internal clutter, external order won't matter. You'll keep rebuilding the same walls with different bricks. But when you choose to confront what's happening inside, when you stop entertaining the thoughts that shrink you, you stop surviving and start creating. Guarding your inner world is a lifelong practice. It's not a switch. It's a relationship you develop with your own mind. Some days you'll catch the fear early. Other days it'll slip past you. But the point isn't perfection. The point is awareness. You learn to hear the voice and recognize it for what it is. Not a prophecy, just a habit. Not a warning, just a whisper from a smaller version of you that hasn't evolved. And the more you recognize it, the less power it holds. Your mind is your kingdom, and like any kingdom, it must be defended, not with aggression, but with attention. You don't win by locking yourself away. You win by sharpening your inner guard, by knowing what thoughts belong and which ones don't, by choosing, moment by moment, which voice to feed. And over time, something changes. The doubt doesn't vanish, but it speaks less often. The fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip. The envy doesn't fade, but it stops steering your choices, because now you're no longer reacting to your mind, you're leading it. And that's what separates the focused from the scattered. The focused don't have perfect environments or silent minds. They've just learned how to navigate the noise, how to guard against the rebellion within, how to stay loyal to clarity when chaos tries to sneak in. And most importantly, they've learned that discipline isn't punishment, it's protection. It's what keeps your purpose safe. It's what holds your path steady. And it's what silences the part of you that always tries to pull you back. So if you want to focus, truly focus, don't just change what you do, change what you allow. Stop letting fear rent space in your mind. Stop letting hesitation make decisions. Stop letting self-doubt write your story. Reclaim your mental space like your life depends on it, because it does. And when you do, you'll discover something powerful. The outside world doesn't have to change for you to be at peace. You just have to stop fighting yourself. Most people drown in their own to-do lists, not because they're lazy or undisciplined, but because they treat every task as if it holds equal weight. But the truth is, your time isn't infinite, your attention isn't limitless, and your energy, no matter how driven you are, has a breaking point. That's why the mind that wants to accomplish anything great must learn to rank ruthlessly, because when everything is important, Nothing really is. We tend to confuse motion with progress. Checking off 20 minor tasks gives a false sense of momentum, but rarely gets you closer to the life you actually want. Meanwhile, the essential thing, the one move that would move the needle the most, sits untouched, buried under digital clutter, emails, or obligations that were never truly yours to carry. The problem isn't your schedule, it's your lack of a hierarchy. Focus isn't just about removing distractions. It's about knowing what deserves your full weight and letting the rest fall away without guilt. That level of clarity doesn't come from impulse. It comes from stillness, from reflection, from defining in advance what matters most and why. Because when you don't define your priorities, the world will hand you theirs. And the world's priorities are chaotic, ever-changing, and rarely aligned with your growth. You'll be pulled in every direction, chasing trends, responding to noise, reacting instead of leading. Marcus Aurelius understood this trap. He once wrote, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control." That clarity, the ability to separate what is yours from what isn't, is what creates internal order. And without that order, focus is impossible. You don't just need a calendar, you need a compass. A powerful mind doesn't aim for everything. It picks its battles, it selects its targets with precision. That's not narrow-minded, it's disciplined. You have to ask yourself, does this action serve the mission, or does it just make me feel busy? It's a brutal kind of honesty, but it's also freeing, because once you know what truly matters, you stop apologizing for saying no. You stop explaining your silence. You stop giving away your presence like it costs you nothing. This hierarchy applies to more than just your tasks. It includes people. It includes thoughts. It includes habits. If your mind is constantly flooded with opinions that weaken your focus or people who drain your energy, you're still placing those things somewhere on your internal ladder of importance. Maybe not consciously, but they're there. And they're eating away at your potential without ever being questioned. To build the kind of life that holds weight, you have to create a filter, not just for your schedule, but for your attention. And it has to be sharp. That filter says, if it doesn't build me, it doesn't belong. That filter honors silence over small talk, creation over consumption, depth over dopamine. That filter protects your mind like it's sacred, because it is. But most people won't understand this. They'll say you're distant, or difficult, or too intense. Let them, because what they call intensity, you'll call alignment. What they call obsession, you'll call clarity. There's no need to explain the structure of your inner world to someone who hasn't taken the time to organize their own. You don't owe everyone access to your attention. You owe it to yourself to guard it. And it's not about being cold, it's about being conscious. There's a difference. You're not building a wall, you're building a system that supports your values, your health, your vision. A system that recognizes that energy is currency, and not everyone deserves a withdrawal. A system that says, my peace isn't up for negotiation, my focus isn't up for auction, my priorities aren't a democracy. Once that structure is in place, something strange happens. Life gets quieter, simpler, but also more powerful, because your actions are no longer scattered, they're aligned. Your effort isn't diluted, it's intensified. You start to see results not because you're doing more, but because you're doing what actually matters. The trivial things begin to feel heavy. You look at them and ask, why was I ever spending so much time here? And slowly, you free yourself. But don't be surprised if the old habits try to return. The compulsion to please, to prove, to be everything to everyone, it doesn't die easily. You'll feel it in moments of fatigue or doubt. That's when you need to return to the hierarchy. Look at it, study it. Remind yourself why you chose this path. Remind yourself that what feels urgent isn't always important, and that a life built on deep focus may move slower, but it builds stronger. Carl Jung once said that your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. That awakening doesn't come from chasing every opportunity. It comes from narrowing your field of vision until only the essential remains, from separating what looks impressive from what is actually effective, from choosing depth over distraction. In the end, the sharpest minds aren't the ones that hold the most information. They're the ones that know exactly what to ignore, the ones that protect their time like a fortress, the ones that treat their mind like sacred ground. And when your priorities are aligned, your life becomes proof of that alignment. You don't have to announce it. You embody it. You live it. And in that space, your focus isn't forced. It's inevitable. Most people live in constant motion, not purposeful movement, but mental noise disguised as productivity. The moment they sit still, their hands twitch toward a screen. Their eyes search for something to scroll. Their minds, unused to silence, begin to panic, as if stillness is a signal of falling behind. But the mind was never designed for this kind of perpetual input. It was designed for depth, for clarity, for reflection, and those only emerge when everything else falls quiet. We often confuse stillness with passivity, as if sitting in silence is unproductive. But the truth is, stillness is one of the most disciplined states you can enter, because it goes against every modern instinct. In stillness, you face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the insecurities you've distracted yourself from, the questions you've buried beneath routines, deadlines, and distractions. And sitting through that discomfort, without fleeing, is where a stronger mind is built. There's something ancient about it, a kind of inner forge that's been used by warriors, monks, thinkers for thousands of years. They all knew what most people forget today, that silence isn't empty, it's full of signals, and only the still mind can hear them. What you notice when you're not being pulled in 1,000 directions reveals who you really are. Without the noise, you don't just hear your thoughts, you confront them. You see how fast they drift, how quickly they react, how addicted they are to stimulation. And in that realization, you get a choice, to keep running or to begin training. Because that's what stillness is, a form of mental weightlifting. Every second, you resist the urge to react, to check, to consume. You're strengthening your attention span. And attention is everything. It's the raw material of creativity, of learning, of mastery. If you can't command it, you're always scattered. But if you can direct it at will, you become unstoppable. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And mastery doesn't begin in the spotlight. It begins in solitude, in the quiet discipline of noticing your own mind before it's hijacked by the world. It starts when you treat boredom not as a problem, but as a test. Because the average mind runs from boredom. It opens a new tab, scrolls a feed, finds anything to avoid the silence. But the powerful mind, it leans in. It knows that if you can sit through that initial discomfort, something deeper will surface. There's a subtle strength that comes from this, a sense of inner gravity. While others are pulled by every notification, every trend, every crisis, they remain centered. Stillness teaches you that presence doesn't require stimulation, that clarity doesn't come from input, but from space. You start to see more with less, think sharper with fewer thoughts. And when it's time to act, you do so from a place of inner alignment, not reactivity. This doesn't mean retreating from life. It means entering it more consciously. The person who practices stillness isn't avoiding the world, they're preparing to engage with it more effectively. Just like a blade must be sharpened before battle, your mind must be honed before it's thrown into chaos. Stillness becomes the whetstone, not the absence of action, but the refinement of it. But stillness takes commitment. It won't reward you instantly. In the beginning, it feels frustrating, pointless. You'll wonder if you're wasting time. That's part of the training. You're not just building focus. You're learning to detach from the need to be constantly entertained. You're building tolerance for quiet. And that tolerance is rare, because in a world that equates silence with weakness, the person who can sit alone, think clearly, and feel calm becomes dangerous. Not in a violent sense, but in an unshakable one. And this strength seeps into everything. In conversations, you become a better listener. In conflict, you pause instead of explode. In decision-making, you wait for insight rather than rushing into reaction. That kind of discipline doesn't show up in motivational quotes. It's not loud, but it's felt. It's the kind of energy that says, "I don't need to chase noise to prove I'm alive." It's the posture of someone who knows who they are without having to constantly prove it. Eventually, you begin to crave it, not as an escape, but as a foundation. You carve out time for it the same way a musician tunes their instrument, because you've learned that without it, you're scattered, reactive, foggy. But with it, everything sharpens. You start your day not with chaos, but with clarity. You face challenges not with panic, but with poise. Stillness becomes your edge. Carl Jung spoke of the unconscious mind as something that reveals itself when we're quiet enough to listen. And he was right. Stillness pulls back the curtain. It shows you the roots of your behaviors, your fears, your desires. And instead of being controlled by them, you begin to understand them. That awareness is power. Because once you see the mechanism, you can rewire it. So in a world that celebrates noise, choose quiet. In a time that rewards constant motion, practice stillness. It won't make you slower, it will make you precise. It won't disconnect you, it will reconnect you to the only thing that truly matters. Your ability to focus, to think, to act from a place of strength. Not because you're overwhelmed, but because you're aligned. Because stillness has taught you to respond, not to react. And that discipline? That's where real freedom begins. There's a moment when the things you once had to fight for, clarity, control, discipline, start to feel less like a struggle and more like your nature. You don't need a list of habits or a pep talk to pull yourself together. You just do what needs to be done. Not because someone told you to, not because it feels good, but because it's simply who you are now. Focus, when deeply lived, stops being a task and becomes a form of presence. You're no longer pretending to be the person who's in control. You are the one who leads from within. That's when everything shifts. You're not waking up asking how to get motivated. You're not debating whether to stay committed. The decisions have already been made, long before the moment arrived. And from that still, centered place, your actions begin to move with precision. People notice, not because you're loud or aggressive, but because you're clear. Clarity is magnetic. It doesn't chase, it draws. And that's the essence of becoming the weapon. You don't need to display your sharpness. You simply exist in a state that is naturally effective, naturally decisive, naturally disciplined. Most people wait for a crisis to get serious. They wait for loss, heartbreak, rock bottom. But when focus becomes your default, you don't need the world to shake you awake. You're already awake. That's where the real transformation lies. Not in a temporary sprint, but in a sustained internal evolution. The kind that doesn't fade after a weekend of inspiration. The kind that endures through monotony, resistance, even pain. Plato once said, The first and best victory is to conquer self. That victory isn't loud. It happens in quiet moments, when you choose focus over impulse, discipline over ease, inner stillness over external noise. Over time, those choices stack. They form a structure, a character, until one day you realize you're not pretending to be strong, you've become it. You're not faking presence, you're living in it. When your mind is trained to obey your will, distractions lose their power. That's the real freedom. Not the absence of demands, but the presence of inner command. You control where your energy goes. You decide what's worth your time. And that sense of control isn't rigid, it's calm, alert, ready, just like a blade kept sharp but sheathed. It's not drawn for every small battle, but when it is, it cuts clean. And there's beauty in that, in becoming someone who doesn't just chase focus in moments, but embodies it in motion. You walk differently, think differently. Even your silence speaks. Because when you carry focus like armor, you don't need to prove your worth. You live it. That's what makes it unshakable. Not the absence of chaos, but your refusal to let chaos define you. Not the absence of emotion, but your mastery over its direction. You begin to operate from a deeper rhythm, a rhythm that isn't dictated by trends or moods or approval. It comes from something more grounded, your own inner command. When you hold the reins of your mind, life doesn't pull you in 20 directions. You steer. You pause when you need to. You accelerate when it's time. And no matter what storm you step into, your clarity becomes the anchor. This doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean you never waver. But even in those moments of doubt or fatigue, there's a part of you that never forgets the path. You return quickly. You reset faster. Because focus is no longer a performance. It's a return home. A return to what you've built inside. In time, you realize you don't need the world to slow down to find peace. You carry your own pace. You don't need others to understand your choices. You've already accepted them. You don't need a reminder to stay locked in. It's simply how you breathe now. This is the essence of becoming the weapon, not something forged by rage or revenge, but by consistency, control, and inner fire. By a mind that no longer scatters itself across meaningless noise. A mind that chooses what it engages with and why. A mind that no longer leaks energy into what cannot be changed, but channels that energy into creation, discipline, purpose. When you live like this, life changes. Not because life itself becomes easier, but because you become stronger. Strong enough to endure, quiet enough to listen, focused enough to cut through the fog. And that focus, it no longer flickers. It burns, steady, relentless, free. Because the final stage of mastery isn't about doing more, it's about becoming more directed, more intentional, more grounded. And when you become the weapon, not only do you stop being swayed by the world, you start shaping it, with calm, with purpose, with power. The moment you stop chasing focus and start becoming it, everything changes. The world no longer controls your rhythm, you do. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and let the quiet strength within you speak louder than noise ever could. Watch the next video on your screen to keep building the mind that no one can shake. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.